Good morning, board members, and good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this meeting of the SWestrans board on Friday the 27th of January 2023. This meeting is being live streamed and recorded, and the recording will be made available on the website for public listening following this meeting. Could you please put your camera off? Mr. Reid, could you please put your camera off? Thank you. I'll just take people through the remote participants on Teams. Please follow the good practice guidance, which includes muting your microphones and switching off your videos when you are not addressing the meeting. Right, speak in the Teams chat function when you want to contribute. I'll also look out for the hand icon. No material should be posted in the chat function if it is intended as part of the discussion. The usual standing orders apply, including that any votes will be undertaken by roll call. Please speak clearly and directly into the microphone when making contributions, and when referring to reports, please provide reference to the relevant pages and the paragraph to allow everyone to follow. Claire, can you take us through the sediment and apologies, please?
Okay, thank you, Chair. I can see there's a comment online about one of our Vice Chair not being able to hear online. Can I just check that the other members on Teams can hear? Okay.
We'll just adjourn for a couple of minutes to see if we can get the Vice Chair connected.
Good morning, Karen. This is Abby, the AV technician here in the hall. Can you hear us? She did turn her camera on.
Thanks everyone for your patience there. The Vice Chair was having difficulty. Hopefully she can join us soon. I'll get Claire to take us through the sediment and apologies. Claire.
Okay, thank you, Chair. We've got two apologies this morning from Councillors David Bryson, Councillor Andrew Wood and our NHS representative David Bryson. There are 4 board members currently present, being yourself and Maureen Johnston in the Council Hall. Here on Teams we have Keith Walters and the Vice Chair. Not currently present is Councillor Jim Dempster. Thank you.
Thanks. Thanks very much, Claire. We'll go to agenda item 2, which is declarations of interest. Do any board members have a declaration of interest they wish to make? I don't see anyone coming in. So before I move on to the agenda, I would like to advise the board and the observers that I have agreed to an additional item of late business, item 10, on the outcome of the local bus procurement for a replacement of the 101/102 Dumfries to Edinburgh service. All members will have received a copy of the report by email, and there are copies available at the meeting today. So if we move on to agenda item 3, which is the minute of the meeting on the 25th of November 2022, can we approve the minutes? I'm getting nods in the room. I'll take silence, the thumbs up. Is that a thumbs up from Karen? She can hear. Thanks, Karen. Okay, we'll accept the approval of the minutes. We'll now move on to agenda item 4, which is the TransPennine Express presentation. This report provides a short update on rail matters relating to TransPennine Express and the services they operate on the West Coast Mainline 7-hour region at Lockerbie. We have Graham Meikle-John from TransPennine available on Teams who will deliver an update and then take any questions. But before I let Graham in, Kirsty, do you have anything to add to your report?
Nothing to add, Chair.
Thank you very much. I don't know if we should go to the recommendation to agree to take the report. I think that's the proper procedure. Okay, we'll go to the recommendation, which is to agree to receive the presentation from TransPennine Express, if members are happy to agree. See nods. So, Graham, welcome, and it's over to you.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning. Hopefully you can hear me okay. Is that right?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes, that's grand. Good. Thank you. This is a verbal update rather than presentation, and I would much rather be talking about the development of the service and opportunities for station development and other factors, but I have to focus on the issue in hand, which is the ongoing issues affecting punctuality and reliability of the service. It is not acceptable. It has not been acceptable for a long time, for the full duration of last year. And I sincerely apologise on behalf of myself and TransPennine Express for the variables, inconsistencies and the extensive delays and cancellations which you and your residents have experienced over the course of the last year. I know no apology is enough, but it is not the situation we want to be in, and I want to start with the comments just by making that apology to you. I think it's important to, I think also to set this into context in terms of where we are, but also in terms of what needs to be done to deliver the quickest improvement for the customers of these services, the people who are needing to get to Edinburgh, Glasgow, or heading south for various appointments, leisure travel and other factors. How do we get services back to a reliable timetable? And the quickest way for that, and the single biggest thing that would make the most difference to the provision of these services, would be ASLEF, the train drivers union, to agree for their members at TransPennine Express to work overtime again. They withdrew from an agreement in December last year, so over a year ago, and that is a single constraint we've had. I'll go into the reasons why, but it's related to overtime helping support the delivery of training. But if you take a step back, the COVID-19 pandemic caused a significant backlog in route and train traction knowledge retention for existing drivers, and also considerably slowed the training activity for new drivers, which gave us a problem. But despite that backlog, by the summer of 2021, we were recording the highest levels of operating performance ever seen at TransPennine Express. But that was with the benefit of drivers working overtime, which supported the delivery of training required for the raft of different engineering projects happening on our network, and also day-to-day service operations. So that context of where we were back in the summer of 2021 really provided us with that stability, and as I said in the record, outstanding levels of performance delivered for the customers. So not only have we been working through a training backlog, particularly on the West Coast Main Line, which provides your services at Lockerbie, we've also been providing the training support to provide diverse route knowledge elsewhere on the network. For example, between Leeds and Manchester, there's the multi-billion TransPennine route upgrade, which will have quite significant diversity works and long periods when the main route is shut during 2023 and years beyond. And getting that training done to enable those works to happen on the fixed date is the reason why we have this pressure point. So no other train operator across the network has the scale of training demands we have. And with the scale of this training activity, the ability for it to be supported by drivers choosing and being able to work overtime would be highly advantageous. It's beneficial for customers because we can make more rapid progress with training, and obviously there's a financial benefit for the drivers who earn overtime. That's actually a key point, because what is already not the best situation is actually being compounded, because we have drivers who have, for whatever reasons, their income is supported by earning overtime. For over a year, they've not had that benefit. So we actually have drivers leaving us to go and work for other train companies, and particularly freight companies, where they can earn their salary, but also they have the option to earn overtime. And it's another reason why we need ASLEF to make a move and actually enable overtime to be restored at our company, as it is at other train companies elsewhere on the network. So with the scale of training activity, as I said, the abilities of it being supported by drivers working overtime would be highly advantageous. Now, to put that into context, during December last year, as I said, ASLEF withdrew from the agreement, and that was based upon, in terms of the root cause, why did they walk away, or rather end that agreement that was in place. It was under a condition where the union wanted the driver, who was marked as being a spare for that day, to be sat working at home effectively, rather than being positioned in the depot. No COVID restrictions were in place. That was a method of work put in place when we were in the middle of the pandemic. But back in December 21, that wasn't the case. And actually having the driver available in the depot means you can provide an immediate response to operational needs as they arise, and provide the quickest solution to the customer by getting trains moving. Obviously, somebody who's based at home, who's then called out, you have quite a significant lag of an hour, 2 hours, even longer, before you can make an operational difference to the railway for customers. And that was the reason for moving in that. But that was the reason why ASLEF withdrew from that agreement. And by doing that, it's effectively moved from an agreement which was in place before we moved into the current situations with railway franchising, where it's under national rail contracts. That agreement no longer exists anymore, so we can't just turn something back on. Absence has also played a significant part in the number of daily cancellations, which we have been experiencing, with sickness levels at their worst peaking at 14%. Although that has now reduced to something in the region of 7%. But this, combined with the lack of rest day working overtime, and significantly impacted on the training that still had to be progressed. So without overtime working, we have seen training activity taking longer to achieve, and therefore getting new trainees, for example, fully qualified and therefore productive on the main line, is also taking a lot longer than normally would have been the case. Which means you get the knock-on effect for the service reliability. Now, to enable a new overtime agreement to be proposed to ASLEF, the agreement of the Department for Transport, the UK government, was needed. And we are very supportive for those who made representations during autumn of last year to UK government ministers to secure that mandate. That was only one step of the process, because once the government down in Westminster decided, yes, okay, we will give authority to Transpennine to make an offer to ASLEF. ASLEF, of course, need to take the second step and actually agree for that to be implemented. We made an offer to ASLEF last month, in early December, which was a sort of best and final offer on a rate of time and a half, which is a standard industry rate for working overtime for a driver, but also with a guaranteed payment of 5 hours, even if less was worked. So, for example, if a driver was asked to take a unit to and from a depot, that wouldn't take 5 hours of work, but you would be guaranteed payment of a minimum of 5 hours for that shift, at a rate of just under £50 per hour. All within the budget of the business, so it's not an additional cost or anything. It just was there to be paid out if we had overtime in place. Regrettably, ASLEF rejected that offer without putting it to their members, although we have written to ASLEF and confirmed that offer remains on the table for acceptance. So just in summary, restoring overtime working at drivers transport access would make a significant and swift impact on cancellations and enable vital training to be completed. Now, you might have heard some representatives elsewhere making remarks that we don't have enough train drivers. That's not true. In fact, we have the highest number of drivers we've ever employed. When I joined TransPennine back in 2016, we had over 300 drivers. We now have over 500 competent drivers and an additional 75 who are currently going through the training programme, and will be on course to get towards the 600 mark later on this year into next year. But addressing the competency backlog amongst those key personnel is key. Now, to set the training into context, we have had to make some decisions. So you will recall that in September last year, we did, on a temporary basis, withdraw some services operating in the West Coast Main Line. And that was basically to stabilise the timetable, to ensure that there was an element of certainty as best we can to operations serving Lockerbie. And that's for some services on a temporary basis removed, and that enabled training to be accelerated because of the reasons I've outlined that needed to be done in order to try and address the issues on your route. That helped in terms of giving you an element of improvement for punctuality and reliability. And at the December timetable change, we were able to reintroduce 5 services, putting them back in. And as we're going into the course of this year, the remaining services will definitely be reintroduced as and when we have training completed. We're unable to do anything in advance of the major car stairs block, which will be happening in a couple of weeks' time. But once those works have been fully delivered by Network Rail, essential works, you will see us moving to a stage of bringing the remaining services back in. So our view is that ASLEF, if they were to make a move today and restore an overtime agreement, that would have a positive impact on services within days. And also, we do recognise ASLEF's stated position that the industry shouldn't need to depend on for stay working, and we'd be wholly committed to work with them and the UK government to ensure we got to the circumstances where that objective was reached. But it's not a tap you can turn on and off. You do have to plan for that. And ultimately, it's all about delivering the best possible service that we can do for customers. I'd also just state that any overtime agreement is entirely separate to the ongoing national discussions over pay, which is being led by the Rail Delivery Group. And enabling overtime to be restored does not require any agreement on pay to be done on the first or both coming together. Any agreement on overtime can be acted today if ASLEF agree. So the most important thing is that we want to provide a service that you and your residents, your constituents can rely on, and we want to be able to provide that service to you. But we effectively need all those with an interest in this situation to work together and to collaborate and move to a position where we recognise that this has been an unacceptable year for the users of this service and this route, and we need to recognise wider issues in terms of pay and terms and conditions and other things that we looked at. But in order of doing what's right for the customer and also what our train drivers want, and get back to the position where we have the option of overtime to the workforce, which can then be used to accelerate training, but also provide service stability in a planned way. I would be more than happy, Chair, to take any questions that attendees might have. I would just end by advising that we are bringing forward a recovery plan to the Department for Transport, which will be with them in the coming weeks. And that plan will map out how we look to restore and recover not just the operations, but the wider business from the impact we've had. And that will include working with stakeholders such as SWestrans and the work that Douglas Kirkpatrick does with us on a regular basis to take that forward. So that plan will be going to the Rail Minister in the Department for Transport in the coming weeks, and it will be a key part of the plan moving forward. Whatever we are with that ASLEF, we do need to recognise we need to recover the business and ensure it provides an effective service for your residents, whether they're going to work, to medical appointments, leisure, education, and allow people to get to your area as well. So, Chair, happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Graham. Before I move on to questions, can I just ask June, could you please switch off your camera, June? Thank you. Appreciate that. Thanks very much. I mean, you're all obviously aware of the BBC report this morning. I watched on the news, there was 40% of the trains were cancelled. That's a huge number of trains, you know, for one particular service. It doesn't seem to be that sort of level with the other operators. I don't know if you've got anything to add on that, Graham.
Yes, thank you, Chair. It is a high level and it's not acceptable. The context of where we are is that we are in a different place to other train operators, and it is driven by the scale of additional training that we have to do across the business, but also we haven't had the option of drivers to work overtime for a year. We've also had drivers leaving the business to earn more money because they can earn overtime elsewhere. There's also been industrial action which has put back training. If you have a block of action, say for a 24 or 40-hour period, that does help. That does basically put your training plan back by a week. So it's not that it is we're exceptional to what other operators are doing in terms of benchmarking. Our circumstances are entirely different to them. What they have is because of the volume of additional training demand that we have set against a hard deadline, and also the fact that we haven't had overtime for over a year. Those operators either have just had it withdrawn by ASLEF, for example, on LNER on the East Coast, or they still have the agreement and the flexibility in place.
Thanks very much, Graham. I'll take questions first of all from board members, then the observers, and then followed by members of the public. So any board members wishing to ask a question? Councillor Walters. Keith.
Yeah, just a couple of sort of questions. I think you might have answered it just at the end there. Is the overtime ban only with your company, or is it something that affects other companies? And can you just clarify how if you've got more drivers than you've ever had previously and you've got a reduced timetable, how come you're still hitting the level of cancellations that we're experiencing or the passengers are experiencing?
Just come in, Graham.
That's fine. Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the question. There's not a broad approach in terms of all train companies have rest-day working or don't. Rest-day working historically has been an agreement which train companies would secure from ASLEF either on a 6 or a 12-month basis. So it's never permanently there, and effectively you negotiate it, and ASLEF can always withdraw from that agreement, as is their right as the union representative of the drivers. There are some train operators who have lost their agreement with ASLEF recently, and for example, just mentioned LNER, but also Northern as well. They don't have it, and also cross country, they're affected. Where we're different is that we are the operator who hasn't had it for the longest period of time, since December 2021, but also we are the ones who have the highest need for the additional training. So it's not about getting new trains in, it's not about doing other parts, it's the additional training, but it's a backlog of training from COVID-19, and also as we have new entrants to the business coming forward, that training is longer. It takes about 18 months to train a driver. It's far longer now because you can't get the training completed. We were about, it was in the summer, we were just signing off people who had started work before the pandemic, and their training program had been affected. And I think that explains why you've got the mismatch between, we do have the highest number of drivers we've ever had, but the reason why you don't have their productivity out in the main line and affecting that is that the training isn't fully completed. So there'll be parts of the route knowledge which aren't complete. And if you're running the service, say that we run from Newcastle to Liverpool, that requires 3 different legs of train crew change. Your West Coast mainline services predominantly change at Preston. But because we can't get the training completed, you've got gaps in that, and therefore that affects the provision of the full service. And that's why this would have the immediate improvement. One, in terms of stability, but also training would be accelerated because those small parts are quickly resolved, and then you have those drivers who are not only competent, but all their training needs, all that training backlog is resolved, and that's where it's genuine that this would be a step towards delivering what's right for the customer here. And I think in some of the dialogue, the customer's been overlooked. But it's not us saying forever and a day we must have rest day working. We can easily do a managed approach with ASLEF and the UK government to get towards the size of the workforce. It means you don't need to have rest day working for training, which is predominantly what it's used for, and you have that going forward. But hopefully that explains why we've got a high figure, but it's that training element that we've got to get through. And that's the core reason why you've got services being affected, but also why we made the decision back in September to give Euroute stability, because it was the best way of trying to deliver and fail every day, scale it back, get the training in, but also provide what we know we arguably can do, albeit there can be issues on the day. Hopefully that helps.
Has that been helpful, Keith?
That has been helpful, thank you.
Any other board members wishing to speak? I'll move on to observers. Graham?
Yeah, good morning, Graham. Graham Whiteley. We have met. Can I say, I find it slightly... You're part of the management team at TransPennine, and it seems like somehow during the last few years, during the time you've owned this company, managed this company, that the status quo where drivers and conductors presumably are expected to work overtime and rest day working, and that fits with the general ethos of the railway. And I mean, I have to say I'm glad I'm not working for the train company. I wouldn't want to be told, right, well, you're on Sunday, whether you want to or not. I also find it difficult to understand that TransPennine is such a complex organisation in terms of its roots that its training needs are different to the rest of some of the other train companies across the country. The other thing is, as you've admitted, the service, some days, I think on day before yesterday, Lockerbie stops all actually called. There was actually a full service. The timekeeping was pretty rough, but some days it's just the National Rail website is just a sea of red for Lockerbie with cancellations. And now they're not all your fault, admittedly. A couple of days ago, it was signalling faults, which basically threw most of the West Coast mainline service out the window. But the level of cancellations, I mean, I have made two journeys I wanted to make in the last month from Lockerbie. I would have made from Lockerbie one to Edinburgh and one all the way to Sheffield via Manchester. In neither case could I possibly consider using your trains. So I drove in both instances. Edinburgh's not too bad. Sheffield, that's 5 hours each way by car, whereas, it'd been much less by TransPennine Northern. And has been exposed in the Guardian newspaper, and finally the ORR, Office of Rail Regulation Chair, has twigged that your company specifically, and to a lesser extent Avanti, West Coast, are using so-called P-code cancellations up to 22 hours the previous day, which means that when you report cancellations to the ORR, it artificially inflates them because you're only cancelling on the day as going forward as records. I received, I'm not entirely sure, it was actually emailed from you to stakeholders, a letter signed by your MD, which is explained really the situation you've just given the board here. I was a bit stunned, to be honest. I wasn't even quite sure whether it was a spoof letter issued by ASLEF, because it seems to be that there's no recognition of man management taking place. It seems to be, and we all know, I mean, those of us who work in the industry, I know full well, and I'm sorry to say this, that it's the Minister, at the end of the day, it's Department for Transport that decides what you can do and all the other franchised operators.
There was a lot in that, Graham. I'm not sure if there's one or two questions, maybe there was, but I'll see if Graham Meikle-John would like to respond.
Thank you, Chair. I made a couple of notes. I'll sort of pick out where I felt there was questions being asked. Absolutely not. Is there any expectation of anybody to work overtime? Overtime is voluntary, and I need to quash that straight away. That's not the expectation at all. Overtime provides the ability for flexibility in the interest of the customer. And it's absolutely essential we keep focused on the customer here. There's lots of people outside who will talk about the running of trains and all of that, but we need to be focused on the customer here, and that's what's important. Overtime enables people to have the choice to work. Not compulsory whatsoever, in order to, for example, if you have very last minute sickness or people who need to respond to emergency family situations, is somebody willing and able to come in to work overtime to enable those trains to run? That's what that is for. And also for the core rested working agreement, it also enables accepted and understood, then you're not going to get the scale of the training demand and problem that we have set against the context of when this was all planned and budgeted for back in 2021. You had rest day working, and then that was removed. So a key part of the foundation of the programme was taken away. In terms of performance, yes, there are days when it's bad, but there was a day this week, as you pointed out, where we had signalling problems, and that affects the full route, even if that's down on the southern end of the route. And also there was a morning this week where tragically there was a suicide on the outskirts of Glasgow, which affected the morning services and therefore the operation of the fleet going back and forth. So those things are factored in. It's not just the core operation, but these things don't affect, and particularly, sadly, cases of suicides obviously have a severe impact, both in terms of the operation, but also those connected to it, and particularly those of the person involved. And I think I would also put in the context, because there was a remark made about man management. It is managed, and that's why we know what the training need and the requirements are, and that's why we've got this timeline in terms of how we can do this. But it's making that happen to go forward, and that's why we need the rest day working. So it's not about bad management or other factors. Anybody would have this problem. You could remove, first, most of it has actually missed the fundamental point of what P coding is all about. And it's a mechanism used by the industry to ensure that if you have known resource gaps, then you have the timetable amended evening before that following day of operation to ensure you have maximum awareness for the customer over what the rail is planning to run that day. It's got nothing to do with massaging figures or anything, and that's utter nonsense. The people who have been about the ability to provide customers with advanced information. Otherwise, you're going to turn up at Lockerbie and you'll just find out the train's cancelled. You find out the night before in the timetable. All of the data on our cancellations is shared with the Department for Transport, is shared with the Office of Rail and Road. No cancellations are overlooked. How figures are presented in normal industry data, but the data is there. There's no messaging of figures. There's no financial benefit because we still pay the compensation to customers for trains that aren't running. This is a smokescreen, to be frank. But I would make two comments from the letter the regulator sent the industry just over a week ago, where it says, and I quote, where cancellations are necessary and known, advising these in advance for the benefit of passenger planning is good practice, which is what we've been doing. And they also say, and I quote, for clarity, this should not simply mean a return to on-the-day cancellations only. We require a method to be employed by which cancellations due to late notice resort. This is a mechanism where we have the best possible information provisions for customers in advance so they can plan their journeys ahead, or they know what their alternative options are for travel and other operating services. It's got nothing to do with figures in a spreadsheet, and then at the end of the day, this is about doing what's right for the customer. Thank you.
Thanks, Graham. I've got Douglas Kirkpatrick want to ask a few questions. Douglas?
It's more an offer, Graham, rather than a question, but also I think one of the key aspects here is trust and that information flow between passenger and the industry. There's lots of data out there, there's lots of websites where you can get bits and pieces of this. What I would like to do as an organisation, as SWestrans, is to work closer with yourselves and Avanti to actually get that flow to people, that information flow to people locally. Because even as a transport professional, and allegedly I'm a transport professional, well, that's maybe questionable, I struggle to get that flow. And I have not trusted to use Lockerbie recently. Me and the chair went up via Glasgow on ScotRail because there was more chance it would actually run. And that's worrying to me because Lockerbie is a key point on our network and we need to grow the market there. So I'm just really, it's that offer to work closer with yourselves and what do you think we can do to assist you to get that information to and from the customer in a better way?
Thanks, Douglas. I'm sure Graham will appreciate that offer.
Yes, Chair, could I just make one or two comments on the back of what Douglas has said? Yeah, just to state, I've worked with Douglas for a couple of years on development opportunities and service. One of the most outstanding professional people in this sector, local authorities and transport, and I've always valued what Douglas has been able to provide us with feedback, the good and the bad, always constructive and always helpful. And I think in that context, Douglas, what you've suggested there is really important because that dialogue and that certainty adds into the recovery plan that I was talking towards. So I'd be happy if your diary was able to do this, to look at a meeting every period, so every 4 weeks, where we could go through where we are in terms of one, the recovery plan, but also what's been happening on the railway. And if that helps you in terms of briefings and other factors through SWestrans and the council to demonstrate the recovery of services or the programme we've got going forward, whether we have overtime working or not, I'm happy to make the offer and to have convene those meetings with you every 4 weeks if that would help.
I'm sure that would be appreciated. Thanks very much, Graham. Yeah, if we can work collaboratively in trying to secure a reasonable service from Lockerbie, I'm sure that will be for everybody's benefit. I've got who? Danny Alderslow wishing to ask a question. Are you an observer or no? You're a member of the public. Okay, Danny.
Thank you, Chair. Can you hear me okay? Hello, Chair,
Yes,
can you hear me okay?
fine.
Yes,
Oh, thank you. Yeah, so I'm a regular public transport user, and our route for family would be the bus from Gatehouse to Dumfries. Then there's a really good regular bus service from Dumfries to Lockerbie. But the majority of our journeys, Graham, by the time we got to Lockerbie, this is getting the train to Glasgow or Edinburgh, which is a great service that a lot of people appreciate in Galloway because it's only an hour's journey, is that we would never have a seat. Are you aware of that? And it's because it's always been a note of contention for a lot of people to get Virgin trains from Glasgow to London, and a lot of people going on to England, where we're paying expensive prices for a lot of us, and yet you don't get a seat. So you're talking there when you mentioned getting compensation for passengers. Should there not be compensation for people who can't get a seat? You know, if we're devoting our money to public transport and we're using 3 different bits of transport in one day, surely we should have a comfortable journey of good quality.
Danny, was that to do with TransPennine, or was it when you mentioned Virgin,
Yes.
or it's Avanti?
Yeah, sorry, Chair. The TransPennine, so it's the Lockerbie to Glasgow or Edinburgh. It's very common that a lot of people, when we get on at Lockerbie, we can't get a seat. There's no seats available. Can that be improved? This has been on for years. especially in the summertime, high peak times when the schools are off.
Yeah, thanks very much, Danny.
Thanks, Chair.
Yeah, appreciate that. I mean, I'm sure Graham will, I don't know if he wants to respond, but I mean, that's something that you could probably take up with TransPennine itself, as opposed to this particular meeting. It was really just to get an update from Graham and a few questions to ask. So I don't know if you want to come in, Graham, on and respond to that.
I'll just briefly, Chair. Obviously, there are reservations in advance for seats that can be made, but we have a fixed formation of rolling stock 5 carriages. And for example, if we're heading up into the Six Nations and those services heading towards Edinburgh on match days, will be particularly busy because there's additional people wanting to travel. But like I said, there are reservations to be made for turn up and go tickets. They obviously provide travel, which is easy across the industry, but they can't come guaranteed with a seat. I think in these cases, it's actually just working towards having the full restoration of services on the route, which we will be working towards once the car sales block is out the way, and that provides you with a full complement of 40 trains on the route. But then providing that is making the case to government, UK government in this case, for continued investment in rolling stock, because 5 carriages is quite restrictive. We should be operating at 7, if not longer, on these routes, and that requires further investment to realise that, because the demand is there, particularly at the weekends now, where the leisure market is above pre-COVID levels at the moment, and we need to be providing service utilisation when people need it. We are looking at other options which could look at additional services at the weekend, so providing additional seating capability when there is additional demand, but we can't commit to that for the reasons I've outlined during this meeting. We've got the training, the overtime issues and other things, but all things being equal, those are things we really would look into, because there is high demand, additional demand to travel at weekends, and if we can provide the stock and the service to cater for that, then that will improve the situation you've outlined, Danny.
Thanks very much, Graham. Oh, right, one more, and then we'll wind this particular one up. Ron?
Okay. Hello, Graham. I'm real concerned because if you are relying on overtime to operate a timetable, unless you employ drivers that doesn't have to work overtime, then the service will not improve. And you shouldn't depend on overtime to run a timetable.
I think that's more of a statement. I mean, Graham's already gave his reasons, earlier on. So I don't know if you want to respond again. I think you've already covered that point, Graham.
Yeah, Chair, I'll just briefly say we're not dependent on overtime to run the base timetable. The overtime is required to accelerate the training for the significant training backlog we've got and the additional heavy volume of training we have to do. It's not about running the base timetable. As I said, we've got more drivers than we've ever had. It's the training that has to be required, and that's what we're talking about here. That's what the overtime is needed for, not simply to run the base timetable.
Thanks, Graham. Yeah, you've certainly been optimistic in your update. I hope everybody could be optimistic as well for the future. You've been very candid about your responses. So appreciate your time coming along this morning. So thanks very much. You're welcome to stay on if you want and listen to the rest of the debate. But we appreciate you spending a bit of time with the SWestrans board. So thanks, Graham.
Thank you, Chair. I will leave the meeting now, but I appreciate being asked, and obviously we're happy to come back and give further updates. And if there are any other matters arising for us, if we could maybe ask Douglas just to let me know afterwards, and we'll pick those points up. But really appreciate having the time with you today. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks very much. Douglas is nodding his head here, so thanks again, Graham. Okay, members. We'll now move on to agenda item number 5, which is the Revenue Budget Monitoring Report 2022 to 23 for the period ending 31st of December 2022. This is our regular update report on the monitoring of our revenue budget. Janet, have you anything to add to the report?
Nothing to add to the report, Chair.
Thank you very much, Janet. I'll open it up to questions to board members initially. No questions. Observers? No questions. Any members of the public? No questions. Okay, we'll move to the recommendations. So members of the board are asked to agree to... Sorry, I'm on the wrong one. Members of the board are asked to note the forecast outturn for the revenue budget as at the 31st of December 2022. Happy to note? Yep. Nods there. We now move on to agenda item 6, which is the capital expenditure programme, excuse me, 2022-23 to 24-25 update. This report provides an update on our capital programme and seeks board approval for acceleration and slippage on 2 elements of the programme, an agreement not to draw down funding from the Regional Active Travel Fund this financial year. Douglas, anything to add to the report?
Unusually, Chair, no at this time, but happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much. Councillor Walters. Keith.
Hi, can I just ask why we're talking about not drawing funds down from the Scottish Government Regional Active Travel Fund?
Douglas.
Yes, thanks, Keith. Yeah, it's down to the challenges to spend the funding we had this financial year. We rely heavily on the Council's active travel team to help us deliver the fund we had. It's a very ambitious one. There's been a number of staff changes, and it's been very challenging to actually to deliver that. And we've not had the resource internally to help the Council's team to take forward the projects at the pace we expected at the beginning of the year. So therefore, we are able to spend our own money on that, but unable to draw down the funding, and because there's a slight risk element in there that we may have to move or slip into next year. So some of the projects that we're hoping to deliver by the 31st of March may slip to next year. And they're also disappointed we're not able to draw down funding, but they do understand the situation we're in this year. I have, however, given some assurances that the funding and the bid we have in for next year, which is highlighted in the programme, has much more chance of us undertaking it this year. We've now got new staff members, and 2 of those new staff members will be focusing on the active travel programme to assist the Council's team in this as well, to add value to that, to take the projects forward. Sorry for the long rambling answer, but hopefully it's helped, Keith.
Has that been helpful, Keith?
That has been helpful. Can I just follow up, though, to why didn't we spend the Scottish Government's funding money first before we spent the Council's money? Because I see where you're coming from on that. And is there no way of actually spending that money out with the active travel team, as in employing other people to actually do the work that's needed?
Douglas.
Yes, thanks, Chair. Yes, the issue here is about the time to deliver, Keith. If we had the time, we could look at drawing down the fund, but we have to be sure that the funding would be spent by the 31st of March, and there is an element of risk that all of it won't be. As a board, you have the ability to slip or accelerate funding within our own internal programme. It's much more complicated when you start to look at that grant element, and it then requires a formal accrual agreement with the Scottish Government for elements that slip into into the next financial year. So therefore, on that basis for this year, we're looking not to draw down that funding, which again, I'm extremely disappointed that we're not able to do that. But we are very clear that we are aiming to ensure we spend all the money and all the opportunity we have to draw down funding next year. And there will be further opportunities as the active travel funding stream grows over the coming year as well, because we've also put in a bid for active travel transformation project as well, which will allow us to bring in additional capacity, as you said, from external areas to speed up the pace of our delivery as well. Hopefully that helps.
Thanks, Douglas. I've got Karen Jackson, then Jim Dempster. So Karen next.
Thanks, Chair. Douglas answered some of the question I was going to ask in response to Councillor Walters. It was about that. So it was really helpful to hear that reassurance that actually there's more capacity coming on stream, so that in future years we're more confident that we can use the budget really effectively. So it was great to hear that. I guess it's that challenge, as Douglas was highlighting, of managing annual budgets, and as a public sector organisation, we're only too aware of that. Douglas, it would just be interesting to hear a little bit about whether the fact we've not been able to spend this year impacts on next year's bid at all, or is Transport Scotland happy to consider it on its merits rather than looking at the fact we've not been able to spend this year? Thanks.
Douglas.
Yes, thanks, Chair. Thanks, Karen. Yes, the elements that we have committed to this year then influence and they then become part of the bid for the following year. So the elements we have committed are on stream to then be part of the bid for the following year. So for instance, the assessments in Dumfries, Stranraer and Castle Douglas take us to a certain stage this year, and then the following year our bid is to actually take that to the next two stages, which is detailed design. So it's all a pipeline process to get to the end of that. But yes, there's no, and when I spoke with Transport Scotland, they were comfortable with the bid that we had put in, and it was the fact that it was follow on from the current year's work that's actually been committed as well.
Thanks, Douglas. Councillor Dempster, you weren't present at the beginning of the meeting. Have you any declarations before I let you in?
My apologies. No, I had a doctor's appointment that ran over, unfortunately, Chairman. I had a question about the minute that I can't ask now, but I'll take that up maybe at the end of the meeting. But no declarations. And I've just a couple of questions. One is on the acquisition of replacement low-floor buses. I take it that programme is still on schedule, Douglas. And the other question is on page 5, the community path links. There's about £17 million of the projects on the list, and there's 300k allocated to that to develop the schemes. But are the lists on here, is that in order of priority, or is that just a random list that just come to light as the report has been produced? Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Jim. Douglas?
Yes, thanks, and thanks, Jim, for the questions. Yes, the acquisition's is still on target. I believe it should be concluded this week, obviously subject to acceleration of funding. The list of schemes, yes, they are in the priority order as agreed by the board in November 21, so it's in priority order.
So I've been helpful, Jim. Thank you.
Yeah, delighted. I'm glad to hear the bus acquisition programme's on schedule. Thank you.
Thanks, Jim. Any observers? Got any questions? I'll take Hugh first and then Graham.
Douglas, can you tell me about the rail station parking, please?
Yes, thanks, Chair. Thanks, you. Yes, the rail station parking is progressing as reported to the board. The last meeting, there is slippage on that regarding the construction of the parking at Sydney Place. The work on taking forward the parking in the front of the station which was presented to the board with a fly-through last time, which is very unusual for the board, is actually being developed as well. So the public engagement has been developed in partnership with the council's engineering design team, and that should be out in the spring to allow people to see that as well.
Thanks you, Graham.
Thank you, Chair. Just one question of really of interest. The works that are going on at the end of on New Abbey Road and the end of Pleasance Avenue, presumably that's the upgrade of that junction that was supposed to be scheduled when the hospital opened. But the active travel list on page 3, third item, Lovers Walk, Newell Terrace. One of the problems with using that road, if you emerge from really in either direction, particularly if you emerge from Newell Terrace, you are blinded, you're blindsided, anything coming around the corner, and that really needs to be addressed in that particular project. And the other thing, which is really not for us, but it's for the roads department, where they install dropped curbs with the usual tactile, they always leave the road surface lower. So every time it rains heavily, anyone who's standing at waiting to cross the road is likely to get soaked by a passing car. I mean, an obvious example is on A709 at Tesco's, and you get quite severe. Even though there's a gully a couple of metres away, it needs a grid, one of these sort of longitudinal grids at the bottom of it, so that people are not inconvenienced. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Graham. I don't think Douglas can respond on the road side of it. However, he may have something about Lovers Walk, Newell Terrace.
Yeah, that particular scheme, the Lovers Walk scheme, is actually a wayfinding scheme. It's not an infrastructure development at that point. There has been work in the past on plans to look at that crossing from Lovers Walk towards the railway station. And it is part of the junction work that will be looked at as well. So as part of the assessment that the consultants are looking at. So we'll be looking at trying to resolve that. The works at Pleasance Avenue, Abbey Road, are the mitigation works for the hospital site that are now being undertaken. As far as I'm aware, it's a council project. So,
thanks, Douglas. Councillor Walters, you want back in?
Yeah, I'm afraid so. Just looking at the page 3, the second thing down, Dumfries George Street to Nith Avenue, it says progressing for a wider Dumfries design project. So there's no money being spent on that. So where is this? Is this a SWestrans project, or is this further down the list?
Douglas.
yes, thanks, Keith. The active travel programme is an aligned programme along with the council. So that was agreed by the board last year, I think, June, from memory. The council has been developing, in parallel with us, work within Dumfries Town, and this has now become part of that wider Dumfries design project. So it's been taken out of the work for this year to fit in with what the council are taking forward through their capital programme as well. So it's just, there will be instances of this as we go on over the years, because it's an aligned programme where we can look to add funding elements. It's just not, because of the overall aspect of that work, we had to remove this. It couldn't be done separately whilst the rest of the schemes were being looked at by the council.
Thank you, Douglas. Thanks, Keith. I don't see anyone else from observers or board members, so I'll go to members of the public. Danny Alderslow.
Thanks, Chair. So I've been a regular attendee at the active travel to the council, and I was just wondering, will these meetings start again? Because there was a really good momentum going, where we had lots of projects from throughout the region, and it was really building a good network. And yeah, so is that when are they going to happen again? Will it not be until after March then, Douglas?
Thanks, Danny. Douglas?
Yes, thanks, Danny, and a very relevant question, actually. Yes, that was one of the members of the active travel team that I was talking about, where staff had changed. There isn't a new member of staff in place, and I believe that the active travel meetings, forum meetings, will kick off again very shortly.
Thanks very much. I don't see anyone else wanting to come in, so we'll move to the recommendations. which is recommendation 1 is note the update on the capital programme 22-23. Recommendation 2, agree the acceleration of spend on the purchase of low-floor buses as indicated in paragraph 3.3. 3 is to agree the slippage of the construction costs of Lockerbie Station Parking Phase 3 as indicated in paragraph 3.5. And 4 is to agree not to draw down any funding from the Scottish Government's Regional Active Travel Fund for 22-23 and that this be intimated to Transport Scotland. I'll be happy to note and agree. Nods in the room. Jim, you wanted to come back in?
I'm not going to argue with that, Chair, because it's obviously imminent. We need to do something. But would there be an opportunity where we don't, as a board, have the capacity to develop some of these schemes to work in partnership with local community groups, such as development trusts, so that we can draw down this money in the future without the risk of losing it, and it would help deliver projects that otherwise would be delayed beyond a reasonable timescale? Is that something that we could as a board consider? And if that is the case, could Douglas maybe develop some report on how that might be achieved, Chairman?
Thanks, Jim. I'll get Douglas to respond.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Jim. Yes, we have, and you probably know, Jim, we work with Keir, Penpunt and Tinrun Development Trust on the Penpunt to Thornhill path, which is just about to start construction. So, and we are working through the Council's Active Travel team with other similar groups, looking at the Lockerbie-Lochmaben path, for example, amongst others. So that work is already underway. But I'm happy to make it more explicit in future reports to show where we are doing this and what can be done, if that helps.
Does that satisfy you, Jim?
Yeah, you're happy with that, Chairman? I don't need it to be more further clarified. I just want to be comfortable that where a group comes forward, we'll work with them rather than just lose the opportunity to draw down money from the Scottish Government or elsewhere to complete projects that are priority projects for us. That's all. Nothing needing done, Chair. Thank you.
Thanks, Jim. Members, we'll now move on to item 7, which is the local bus update. This report provides further updates on the review of all our supported local bus services and seek board agreement on the end date of the current contract and the tender timeline to replace these contracts. So Douglas, given this is a significance of this work, could you give a summary of the main points in the report, please?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. You will get sick of my voice today, believe me. I'll move straight to section 4 of the report, which looks at Service 101, 102. Obviously, that's now been superseded by the later report in the agenda. Moving on to section 5 of the report, it explains the process we're going through for the review of the supported local bus services, with 5.2 highlighting the summary that was presented of possible developing options at our last board meeting in November. That has moved on a little bit, and obviously at the board in November we agreed to seek funding from the council, additional funding to be considered as part of the budget development process, and subsequent to the board that request was submitted and has been confirmed that that request will be considered as part of the budget considerations. The next element of the report looks at the operator meetings that took place during December 2022, where we met with the majority of the operators, and it was highlighted, the reasons and what we talked about are highlighted in paragraph 5.4 of the report. One of the key questions that we asked the operators is what if they would be willing to extend the existing contracts, which are due to end in August this year, either to April or August the final year, because the contracts had a +1 possible extension in there. The outcome is highlighted in paragraph 5.5 there, with 79% of the contracts by value, the operators who do that, saying that they would not be willing to extend. There are various reasons behind that, main reason relating to the current increase in costs across the industry. So given that, we are recommending today that it would not be sensible to carry some forwards. All contracts should end at the same time. So, and then we can look at the network review as a whole rather than in parts. And it takes away some of the risk within that as well. So the recommendation today is that we determine that all contracts end in August 23. This obviously has an impact on the developing options that we had presented to the board in November, and this is then updated in paragraph 5.8 of the report. And as you can see through those, 2 of the options fall out from that options 2 and 3, because there is no ability to extend those contracts beyond August. There's the procurement timeline, if we choose to end all contracts in August, is highlighted in paragraph 5.9 of the report. Very challenging to get the review completed, and then to present to the board in March a range of options to be considered within that tender package, as well as the as-is option, which is always goes out as part of the tender process. I will stop there, Chair, and take any questions.
Yeah, thank you, Douglas. A lot of work going on there. Councillor Dempster, Jim.
Thanks, Chair. It's no usual, and I wouldn't want maybe to merge 2 different reports into one. But if you look at 2.3 on page 1 of agenda item 7, it talks about 55 of the local contracts valid for a year up to August 2023 with a possible 1-year extension. And I think that's right. We need to avoid these contracts determined at the same time. Otherwise, we're likely to find ourselves funding some and not having the resource to fund others. And it gives me some degree of concern that later on in the report we're being asked to agree a 3-year contract for a service when all the other 55 services aren't enjoying the same luxury, for want of a better word. And I would want to see some way that all contracts are considered at the same time. It would be better budgeting sense. We already had episodes where delivery partners have tried to return contracts part way through the contract. And if that were to happen again, it just causes chaos for our budgeting and indeed for the level of service. So I'm worried that we're offering a 3-year contract or being asked to agree a 3-year contract with one service, and the other 55 are at the mercy of the funding we get over the next 1, 2 and 3 calendar years. So I realise I'm marrying 2 reports into one, but I'm concerned that we're doing 2 things differently in the same meeting, Chair. And I wouldn't mind some advice or comfort from Douglas now we could address that. Thank you.
Thanks, Jim. Yeah, I do take your point. However, the service that's got the 3-year contract actually finishes in March, whereas all the other ones finish in August. So there is a slight difference there that we had to get something in place if we were going that way forward. However, we've got that report still to come, but I'll let Douglas explain it a bit better than myself.
Thanks, Chair. No, it's a reasonable explanation. There was that contract plus the 502 commercial contract, that commercial service that was cancelled that we then funded up to March 2. So those are the 2 contracts that are out of step. It is highlighted in paragraph 4.4 of this report that the 101, 102 service is out of step with the other contracts as well. But there is a need to make a decision on that, and not going to the later report now, Chair, but given the challenges on that particular route that we've had, there was an emergency contract put in, and that's why it's out of step. There's no chance to actually extend it beyond where it is just now, so a decision will need to be made on that contract.
Thanks, Douglas. Any other board members wishing to come in? Karen?
I guess it's a kind of process question, Chair, just about council budget setting. So obviously the option that were recommended takes us one particular way. What happens if the council makes a decision that means that option isn't possible? It'd just be useful to understand where we go next. Do we have to reconsider that once that decision is made? Also useful just to understand that we're future-proofing our approach. So obviously we're looking at a different model for public transport in the region. Are we sure, and I think Douglas is highlighting through the options that thinking is going on, the option that we go for needs to make sure that we're future-proofing it a little bit. So useful to hear from Douglas how that work is progressing. And just the other question was around community transport and how that fits into this model. Douglas, that might be, it might be a red herring in this conversation, but it would just be useful to make sure that we're bearing that in mind. Again, I think that's going to be a key part of the new public transport model going forward. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Karen. Douglas?
Yes, thanks, Chair. Thanks, Vice Chair, for the questions. Yes, Council's budget setting process, we have asked for the additional funding. It's mainly to continue the Service 502 which will now be to the August deadline rather than for the full financial year, which at the time when we asked for the funding in November was for the full financial year, because we're hoping for an extension through the operators of the contracts. So it was to buy that space. So I am, as at officer level, feeding in different elements of this back to that, and it will sit, the council will make its decisions, I believe, at the end of February, and then if there are any implications directly on the contracts, we will come certainly to Chair and Vice Chair, and perhaps even a special board if necessary, to ensure that that's taken forward. There'll be a lot of work that we're doing just now that hopefully will answer your subsequent questions that will come to the March board, which will start to develop that. Community transport is a key element of the new model. The timeline that we have to replace the contracts kind of squeezes what we were hoping to do in the new model. Well, kind of squeezes, significantly squeezes what we were trying to do, but we are not forgetting about that. It is part of our considerations. One of the key things here is that we do not leave any part of our region without a travel option link, and that is where that new model sits. So it's part of our thinking. We're looking at different ways of. We had some very good, interesting conversations with the operators. It's within the report that if we tweak things slightly here, they could actually save some money there and to actually work better operationally. So there's a lot of that thinking going on in the background, and hopefully we'll bring most of that out in the March paper, including how that possibly could be delivered through community transport. And just to finish on the community transport element, obviously the community transport strategy came to this board, and it also went to the Community Planning Partnership and board as well, and there was an agreement there that the senior officers of each of the organisations represented get together to look at how we fund community transport going forward, and that meeting's due to happen, I believe, in February, and that will assist, and it will be one of the building blocks of the new model going forward.
Thanks.
Really helpful. Thank you, Douglas.
Thanks, Karen. Thanks, Douglas. I've seen Councillor Walters. Keith, you had your hand up and it's back down again.
Yeah, sorry about that. I think Douglas might have answered that question. This talk of the new model, is this the new model as in, is this what's going to be presented to us in March? And is this new model going to include the sort of possibility of the council having its own fleet of buses?
Thanks, Keith. Douglas?
Yes, Keith, I have recently been included in the new model, which was agreed by the council and the board back in June 21 within the report, but given this, I took it out this time and just now referencing the new model. I'll just call it the new model. So it's a new public transport model, which is a sort of three-tier approach with community at the top, then supported and council run services in the middle tier and down to commercial at the bottom, but ensuring that there are linkages across the three tiers. So it's just developing a more sustainable way, hopefully, of delivering public transport across the region.
So if I go back to 2021, I should better see that, and we will get an update in March. Is that the plan?
Chair. There was an update on it in the November and September meetings. I think there was within the board papers to give a high level sort of within the board papers there. But we can certainly fire something through to you, Keith.
That's all right. I'll find it. Thanks.
Thanks, Keith. Thanks, Douglas. Any observers? Graham and then Hugh.
Just a quickie. Reference 5.6, para 5.6, Douglas. Is there any evidence coming back from operators that the sort of cost pressures and staffing pressures are reducing or getting better if you like?
Thanks, Chair Graham. Fuel has lessened to a degree, but as you can see at the prices at the pumps, but I think inflation pressures are still pretty prevalent throughout the industry at the moment and will be a challenge, certainly in the short term.
Thanks, Douglas. Hugh?
Douglas, a question here for you. I hear that Houston's Lockerbie is taking over the service 101 and 102. Is that correct?
We've got that in the late report, if you want to just leave it for then, Hugh.
But I'm rather annoyed at it because is Houston taken over from Biggar to Edinburgh?
Douglas?
Yeah, Hugh, yes, there's as I say, the Chair's just mentioned, there's an additional report. The decision will be whether or not Houstons do take over the contract will require a contribution from this board. So the paper number 10, which the Chair will be taking as an additional item, the information is within that report, but it's subject to all three funding partners agreeing the contribution to the contract.
I see, yes, thank you very much.
Thanks, Hugh. No other, sorry? Oh, yeah. I've got Danny as a member of the public. I was just wanting to make sure that there's no other observers wishing to come in. So go ahead, Danny.
Thank you, Chair. Just want to put this next question on behalf of the group that I help coordinate called HOD, the bus, Dumfries and Galloway, where we're bus users that network together and report when buses are late or break down. And I'm just wondering, what is the process when you're talking about procurement and putting services out to tender? What is there in like sort of overseeing the quality of service given by these services? When I attended the last SWestrans meeting, which was 2 meetings ago, there was a report by Fraser from Stagecoach. Within 5 days, the 500 bus broke down twice, leaving people to wait over an hour, or in one case, when another bus came along, or they had to wait 2 hours until the next bus came along. Now, this has been an ongoing issue with the 500 bus, which we call the sort of railway line from Dumfries to Stranraer. And we feel like we're not getting quality for service. It's resulted in people stopping using the service, using the car or whatever way they can get to their destination. So what process is there? Because, I would say to elected members there, when we're aware of like the tightening of budgets, we are giving, companies this money to run these services, and yet they don't get any, like us that run projects, we have to fill in our forms and make sure we spend that money and it's all accrued for and we have our receipts and everything. Whereas we are constantly, waiting at bus stops and the bus is not arriving. What is there no way that there could be a proper consultation with us passengers, but to see and check that these companies are fulfilling their contracts?
Thanks, Danny.
Thank you.
Douglas?
Thanks, Chair.
Yes, and thanks, Danny. And we are now, all contracts are covered by conditions of contract. And within that, there is a requirement to operate to time. There's fines for delays that can be implemented. we need that information, so we need that flow of information from the public back to us. We now actually, for the first time since I can remember, Chair, actually have some monitoring capacity within SWestrans. So we're able to target routes, and we will certainly be doing a significant amount of contract management going forward. And that's already started. Staff have been out over the last 2 months on services across the region, looking at all aspects of the service, not just reliability, but cleanliness and the various other things that passengers ask about, looking at the publicity at stops, which is still an issue, as we know. So yeah, there are processes there. The contracts are covered by the conditions, and we are happy to implement them. And the operators are also keen to ensure that they deliver the service as well to the best of their ability. But again, we need that information flow from the public to let us know. So we have our website, we have telephone number and other things there as well. So happy to take anything as and when it comes in, Chair.
Thanks, Douglas. I hope that's been helpful, Danny. I don't see anybody else want to come in, so we'll go to the recommendations, which is one, note the update on the review of the current supported local bus services to meet the delivery challenges previously identified for 2023-24. Two, to agree that all local bus contracts with an end date of the 6th of August will terminate on that date. And 3, agree the proposed tender timeline for replacing local bus contracts as presented in Table 1. Are we happy to note and agree, members? I'll take silence as consent, nodding in the room. Thank you. Now move on to agenda item 8, which is the risk management. This report provides an annual update of the risk register and ask for board consideration and approval. And I've got Grant Coulthart. Anything to add or highlight, Grant?
Nothing to add, Chair.
Thank you very much. Open to board members, questions, comments? Councillor Walters. Keith?
Just a quick question about in Appendix 1, it's RO7, there's mention to the Spend to Save initiative about revenue funding. And I just wonder what that actually means in terms of transport and stuff like that, this Spend to Save initiative. It's page 3 on the Appendix 1, risk register.
Thanks, Keith. I'll let Douglas come in on that one.
Yeah, thanks, Keith. The Spend to Save initiative actually relates to the use of us using our capital programme to buy bus assets and then offer them as through the contracts for operators to provide. We took a confidential paper on it at the last meeting, so it perhaps just needs to be reworded to actually make it more explicit what Spend to Save actually means. So we'll look to change that next time.
No, that's fine. Thank you.
Thanks, Keith. Thanks, Douglas. Any observers? No questions? Any members of the public? No questions? Okay, we'll just go to the recommendation. Consider and agree the risk register for 2023-24 included in the appendix. I think we've done that. Thank you, members. We'll now move on to agenda item 9, which is the Strategic Transport Projects Review update. The report provides an update on the publication of the final Strategic Transport Project Review, which gives Scottish ministers a programme of potential transport and infrastructure investment opportunities up to 2042, and asks the board to consider if any further submissions on the points raised by SWestrans should be further intimated to Transport Scotland. And this is your report, Douglas.
Yes, thanks, Chair. Nothing really to add to the report other than to highlight what we did submit as part of the draft consultation in paragraph 3.7 of the report. And certainly from an officer level, our disappointment that we thought was a reasonable response to the consultation had no impact on the final document. But it is what it is, Chair, but we're happy to take any views of the board and push them through to Transport Scotland if necessary.
Thank you, Douglas. Yeah, it was a bit disappointing that we lost a couple of years on our reopening of stations, which we could have probably took forward in the stag and carried on or continued with that. I see your hand up, Keith. Was that a legacy hand initially?
Yeah,
Thank
sorry,
you.
that was me
Thank
failing
you.
to do that.
Okay, I've got Councillor Dempster. Jim.
Thanks, Chairman. Just a pet hobby horse of mine, and Douglas has identified it in his report on page 4, increased safety and resilience in the strategic transport network. There seems to be a lack of commitment on the A76, which disappoints me, and I would want that to be highlighted. We've got one of the biggest private employers in Dumfries and Galloway, based in the upper reaches of Mid and Upper Nithsdale, and it's vital for their business and maintaining over 500 jobs that the road network is fit for purpose, and I wouldn't want us to lose sight of that. And I'm no issue at all with the upgrade of the A75 and investment in the A77. We just can't lose sight of the A76 as part of our key infrastructure, and I just hope Douglas continues to pursue that. And I do support the issue about the retaining the stations. It's an absolute scandal. It's never been progressed to fruition, and I hope that we pursue that as vigorously as we can. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Jim. I don't think there was a question in there. It was just a statement, so well noted. I don't see any other elected members. Oh, Karen, Vice Chair.
Thanks, Chair. I suspect, Douglas, there's limited impact in carrying on a engagement with Transport Scotland, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't do it if there's some good, strong messages we want to give back. As others have highlighted, it's perhaps not the outcome that we wanted to see. As the STPR2 was progressed, though, there were some really good working relationships that you and Borders had developed, and I wonder whether there's an opportunity around STPR2 to just reinvigorate some of that. So that joint working group between Dumfries and Borders, I think, was a really good example of how we could facilitate some of those cross-boundary discussions. And I wonder if we take some of the positives out of this process, we should look at that as something that we'd want to continue going forward. I don't think that's particularly the recommendation of this paper, but I do think there's something in that, because I know that certainly in South Scotland Enterprise we found that group really helpful. Thanks.
Thanks, Karen. Douglas?
Yes, thanks, Chair. And absolutely. It was the Strategic Transport Project Review 2 Regional Working Group, as it was called. Yes, was very, very useful, and actually I think the response we've received to the regional transport strategy from SOSA as well is also referencing that group as a possibility. I have had initial conversations with Scottish Borders senior officers there about resurrecting that group, and I think we would all find it very useful. It was also a good link into Transport Scotland, and to have them around the table at the right time talking about strategic matters across the whole of the south of Scotland and into our borderlands partners as well. So I think, yes, Karen, I completely agree, and I can guarantee that work is underway, and we will be looking to do that.
Thanks, Karen. Thanks, Douglas. I suppose that's an action rather than a recommendation, so we can take that as an action, Karen. Any observers? Graham?
Thank you, Chair. Would I be right in saying that there's no reference in STPR2 to extending the Borders Railway down to Carlisle? And presumably what you've just said about reactivating work with Borders Council and the Borderlands Initiative could kick that a bit harder, couldn't it?
Douglas?
Yeah, I believe so. There's no mention within STPR2 of extending the Borders rail line. I listened to the statement from the Cabinet Secretary yesterday on STPR2 at Parliament, and that was mentioned there as well, that it wasn't within STPR2. But yes, that partnership and bringing that together is very much about coordinating our ask across the whole of the south of Scotland.
Thanks. Any other observers? If not, members of the public? Ron?
Thank you, Chairman. I'm looking at recommendation number 45. Has the Scottish Government indicated or that there is going to be additional space, like additional track on the west coast in the future that will allow future stations like Beattock and Samington being reopened in the plan in the future? The additional tracks, loops, that type of thing. Thank you.
Douglas?
Yes, Chair. We're actually awaiting the delivery plan to see what each of the actions will have, and the Cabinet Secretary yesterday did make it quite clear that delivery plan was still ongoing and still being developed due to for various reasons, but he was hopeful that in the next 2 to 3 months that would be out, and that delivery plan will contain the detail and the timelines for actions that are within STPR2.
Thanks, Douglas. Don't see anybody else coming in, so we'll go to the recommendation. Sorry, Graham, you want to come back in?
Sorry, Chair. Just on the point 44, I had a meeting with representative of the Rail Freight Group, Scotland and the north of England, or north of Britain, the other day, and he made the point that he believes there is great potential for rail freight in Scotland, but the problems are lack of terminal, and it is mainly it is almost wholly the private sector that's providing terminals, and what they call integrators, which is people who are bringing not just one operator owning a terminal, but people who are owning a terminal for multiple users. And the second thing is which is a bit more, is with the decarbonisation of railways, is to actually have a complete electric network, particularly in the central belt, so that Terminal A, Grangemouth, is connected to Moss End, so that electric services can operate fully across the piece.
Thanks, Graham. We did have the Chair's meeting just recently, and we spoke to the Transport Minister, and rail freight was one particular item that was raised at that point, but I'll let Douglas come in if you want to give a more specific answer.
Not sure if it'll be more specific, Chair. Yeah, it's very much, as indicated in my previous response, the delivery plan will have all of this within that, Graham. The rail freight was mentioned yesterday in the Cabinet Secretary's statement, as well as decarbonisation of the rail network. And he highlighted the work that's ongoing between Barrhead and Glasgow at the moment, so as an example of that electrification process. So yes, very much on the agenda, and government has agreed that they will decarbonise the rail network by a specific point in time. So I'm sure that will be within the delivery plan, and we'll get the detail when it arrives.
Thanks, Douglas. With that, we'll just move to the recommendations, which is to note the publication of the second Strategic Transport Projects Review, the STPR2, final report, and consider if any further submissions on the SWestrans position be intimated to Transport Scotland. I'm happy to note that. Nods in the room. Thank you. We now move on to agenda item 10. As indicated at the start of the meeting, I have agreed to take one item of urgent business due to the need for a decision and due to the fact that this information was not available when the papers for this meeting were published. So the item in question is the local bus services 101/102 Dumfries to Edinburgh. I have determined that this report should not wait until the next board meeting due to the need for a timely decision on the matter. The report provides the outcome of the procurement exercise by Strathclyde Partnership for Transport, SPT, for the continued provision of local bus services on routes 101/102 Dumfries to Edinburgh, and seeks agreement from the board for the SWestrans contribution to this cross-boundary contract. So, Douglas, given that this report was only released on Tuesday, can you summarise the main points? Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Chair. I'll be brief as possible. The board has received numerous updates of this throughout the last year and the challenges about the replacement of the service. We are currently spending in the region an annual value of 169k as a board, which is 1/3 of the total value of the temporary contract that's in place. Procurement was undertaken, as advised to the board at our September meeting by SPT, would be the lead authority, and they have been undertaking that procurement process as highlighted in section 3 of the report. I have to thank colleagues in SPT and Scottish Borders for the work they have undertaken to get to a conclusion on this matter that is as probably the best and most and final affordable offer we can actually have at this time. As it states in paragraph 3.4, the exercise just concluded this week. SPT advised us they had concluded the matter this week, advising that a bid of £385,000 a year from Houston's Coaches had been received to operate a 3-year contract with a possible 2-year extension for timetables options 1 and 2, which are basically keeping the same level of service from Dumfries to Edinburgh, slightly reduced between Biggar and Edinburgh by 2 journeys. And SPT's Operations Committee is also meeting today to determine if they're happy with their to award and to commit to their contribution to this contract. Chair. It is again intended that the funding will be split equally across the 3 funding partners. That would be £128,333 per year for the board. This, as mentioned in the previous local bus update paper, it's out of line with the other contracts, but it does then give us that framework in which to, and that certainty on what budget we have available going forward, subject to the Council's budget setting process, giving us additional funding as well. So happy to take any questions, Chair.
Thanks very much, Douglas. So at this moment in time, we were paying 167k, did you say, and that takes us up to the end of March, is that correct? Yeah. What were we actually paying prior to that? What was our level? It was 107, something like that, I think.
Sorry, Chair, I've got my mic still on. It was 105,000, just over 105,000. So it's a £23,000 increase.
Thanks very much. So
sorry, Chair. Just to point out that 105 was a tender price that we received in 2018 and had been no inflationary increase in that whole period.
Thanks very much. So I'll open it up to board members. First of all, I've got Councillor Dempster and then Councillor Walters. Jim?
Thanks, Chair. Just a couple of questions. I thought that we had also asked Edinburgh City Council to make a contribution, because there's no doubt in my mind that that will be the biggest beneficiary. I don't see a lot of folk travelling from Edinburgh to go shopping or spend a weekend in Dumfries. I can see a lot of folk going another direction. And all the correspondence we've had from Biggar onwards, it's been emphasised the importance of the bus network to take folk from Biggar into Edinburgh. Therefore, I would have thought there had been a willingness for them to make a contribution given the revenue implications for businesses in Edinburgh. The other thing is I'm still concerned that here we are committing £130,000, for I want a better word, for 3 years minimum and maybe into 5, which will remove the opportunity for us to prioritise bus networks in future years. And if I remember rightly, Douglas, in a report on this service, said that it was something like 4 passengers per journey that was travelling from Dumfries outbound. So it's not a major link as far as the bus network's concerned. And I would far rather see us tie that bus contract into all the other bus contracts somewhere so that they're all considered at the same time and no piecemeal, because that's the one way as sure as fate that something will go wrong. Thanks, Chairman.
Yeah, thanks very much. I suppose the previous contract, we were the lead as SWestrans, but it's now SPT that's taking the lead on this. But I'll let Douglas come in and see if he can answer some of your points. Thanks, Jim.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Yes, we have and continue to seek funding contributions from City of Edinburgh Council and Midlothian Council. Midlothian do pay the bus departure charges, which are quite significant from Edinburgh Bus Station as part of this. It's out with the overall contract award amount, but they do pay the departure charges within that. But we are and will continue to seek that. And if we do manage to get funding through any of those channels, it would go to SPT, and then that would reduce our contribution going forward. Passenger usage was about, I think it was about, from memory, Jim, it was about 8 or 9. We're about 10% of the overall passenger usage on the service, but it is a critical link, and it meets our objectives within the regional transport strategy to connect to Edinburgh and to the Central Belt. The tender time frame, there is no possibility to change where we're at. This contract ends on the 31st of March, and there needs to be a replacement, or there will be no service going. We can't marry it with our existing contracts at this time. But what it does do, as I said earlier, is it gives us a set amount that we will be committing to, and then we will work with the rest of the services to mitigate that where possible. And as in my discussion in the previous paper, I think there are a number of opportunities where we can look at elements that can reduce the cost to ensure that we continue to keep as much service as possible. But we have to make a decision on this today, Chair, one way or the other.
Thank you, Douglas. Councillor Walters. Keith.
I think that's just covered a bit of my first question, which is why, if we've only got 10% of the passengers, we're paying a third of the cost of the service. That doesn't seem like a good idea, but I'm not sure what opportunity there is to sort of negotiate that share of the funding coming from the different places. If, like you say, if we were able to get something out of Edinburgh City Council, perhaps that would help. But the still question is there going to be an opportunity for, when we renegotiate this contract, or when we look at it again, if it's passed today, for us to look at our contribution so it matches more better the actual passenger use from Dumfries and Galloway? The second question is, are there any commitments to the types of buses that Houstons are going to be using on this route? Because I remember at the last meeting there was quite a bit of discussion about whether the buses were suitable for that length of route, and the answer we got, I think, was that the SWestrans, or the main authority, had specified the type of buses that had to be used, which meant that we couldn't use a sort of more comfortable coach-like bus. We had to use a low-level entry bus, which is a stopping bus. Just those two questions.
Thanks, Keith. Douglas.
Yes, and thanks, Keith. Our share previously was based on mileage, so it was actually slightly higher than a third in the past, because there's a significant amount of mileage. So how the shares worked out is that it's now thought that it's more appropriate that all three funding authorities make an equal share. Scottish Borders previously were only making a very small contribution to the contract of 35,000 when we were the contract holder per year. So they're coming up quite significantly to get to that third each. The types of buses are specified within the contract. Because if it's a regular stopping service, it requires to be a low-floor vehicle to allow access on and off. You cannot undertake a regular stopping service with a coach service. Well, you can, but the wheelchair accessibility and on and off nature of the service requires it to be low floor, and that will have been specified by SPT within their contract.
Thanks,
That's great.
Douglas.
Thank you.
Do you want back in there, Keith?
No, that's great. Thanks.
Thanks very much. Any other board members? No observers. Hugh?
Douglas, I'm rather concerned about the vehicles which are going to be used in the road to Edinburgh. They're a fair age and they don't seem to be very comfortable. Can you give us an update on that, please?
Douglas?
If this contract is agreed across all three funding partners, the buses that will be used will be provided by Houston's coaches. I have no knowledge of what those vehicles will be at this time. But as I said in response to Councillor Walters there, it will be low floor because of the actual need for accessibility on the route.
Thanks, Hugh. Thanks, Douglas. I'll go to members of the public. I've got Ian Reid and then Danny Alderslow. So Ian Reid first, please.
Good morning, folks. Ian Reid from Stand Up for Our Buses. First and foremost, I'd just like to say on behalf of the travelling public, much appreciate and thanks for all the hard work that SWestrans, D&G, SPT, South Lanarkshire, Scottish Borders Council have been doing to get us to where we are. We hadn't envisaged that we would get this result. So there is much relief in communities along the route for knowing that, and we'll call it the kind of the medium-term future of the buses secured. We could be back here in 3 years' time. And the feedback we're getting from passengers, and it would be you might be surprised how much we're hearing from passengers in D&G, is not one of triumph, but one of relief that this really, really, really important service will continue. And some of the questions that you guys have been raising have been raised as well by people from D&G, such as the quality and nature of the buses. Now, Stand Up for Our Buses, we're very clear that it's only half time. We've got another 45 minutes to play, and that is very much about keeping the momentum going, to keep the spotlight on the route, to develop this service, to see passenger numbers increase. You're going to see the strap line coming out more and more and more. That is, people need buses and buses need people. So the starting point for us has been to speak directly to Houstons. We spoke to Houstons on the first thing in the morning after, and I've got to say it was a very encouraging conversation we had. The kind of conversation we'd never been able to have with a large organisation like Stagecoach. They sounded like, you'll know them better than us, but they sounded like an operator who's got a lot of local working knowledge. In terms of the quality of the buses, they're already looking at how they will get the buses that are required for the nature of this route. Already they're saying that they want to be working with Stand Up for Our Buses as a group that very much represents the voices and the needs and the wishes of passengers. That kind of dynamic and that kind of relationship was absent previously between ourselves and Stagecoach. So we're measured but encouraged by where we're at, and really, really, really keen that this sees an opportunity where the relevance and significance and usage of this bus in D&G goes up and up and up. That's what we want to do. It would be great if we're meeting with the 3 SBC councillors on Tuesday. We've requested to meet with the 3 Pennycook councillors. We will be doing likewise with South Lanarkshire, and we would be really keen to meet with anybody from D&G, from council, campaign groups, SWestrans, to see how can we help you guys, not just say, job done, we've got the bus, but job done, and how do we move on and improve and increase the service. But that's where we're at. First and foremost, though, thanks very much for all that you've been done so far. Thank you. Thanks
very much. Mainly a statement there, Ian, but appreciate all the comments that you made. The one question would be, can we meet
would anybody from Dumfries and Galloway be interested in meeting with us to see how we can develop that relationship? And D&G, really keen to do that. So the offer's there.
Thanks, Ian. Douglas?
Yes, thanks, Ian. And Ian, thank you for the comments. I would agree. Houstons are a very good, very competent operator, and they will, I'm sure, if this is agreed, seek to improve and build on the service in partnership with the passengers. And it's one of the critical things that we need to do as organisations, is work with passenger groups and with the operators, statutory authorities, to actually develop and deliver services. Because you're right, buses do need people, and people do need buses. So I like that, and we'll keep that going. More than happy to meet at officer level, but also I'm pretty sure the chair, if necessary, was also happy to come along. Not that I'm dropping a minute at a public meeting. And I can see that Danny from Had the Bus, Dumfries and Galloway, is about to speak as well. So he might want to speak to you as well. So you never know.
Thank you.
Thanks, Douglas. Thanks, Ian. Danny?
Yeah, Joe, just want to say, well spoken, Ian. You know, just to realise to a lot of the elected members, this is something to celebrate. You know, this is really good news, because it did really feel that public transport was sort of getting pushed aside and quite an easy target, really, for budgets, etc. And I mean, I had a meeting with Douglas in the autumn there, and Douglas knows I certainly come from an angle of, I want to help this beautiful part of Scotland promote our public transport. And not, and I don't think it's fair to say there was only 4 people on a bus when we're all responsible for getting more people on buses, you know, for our children's future and for people to enjoy, you know, our beautiful countryside and to keep pollution levels down. So I think this is great news. Well done, everybody. I suppose my one question would be, what was the reason for the withdrawal of a few services from Biggar to Edinburgh? Because that will be a loss, because that is, you know, a really well used service. And I'll just be curious at that. But, you know, well done all involved. I think it's great we got to this stage. And we certainly want to be, you know, be positive about how we can get more people using the 500 bus. But more people, I mean, I got and visit a friend in Biggar on this bus, and what a journey, you know, it's fantastic, you know, and I don't think we do enough to really promote, you know, Scotland and the people here, because, you know, it's a really good social event on a bus. I'd just like to share, you know, you meet locals, you meet visitors. It's a good place to be. So thanks, Chair. Just repeating all what Ian said, really positive. I spoke to a couple in this group. Well done, that group, for really getting people out and raising how much they appreciate that service. But if I could, how did we lose the couple of services between Biggar and Edinburgh? It'd be good to know, to see if we can help maybe replace that. Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks very much for your comments, Danny. Douglas?
Yes, thanks, Chair, and thanks, Danny. It was in relation to keeping the cost of the contract down and to ensure the reliability of the service, keep the number of buses manageable, but to retain a service as close to the level that was there at present. As Ian has said from Stand Up for Our Buses, development opportunities will come as we go forward, and hopefully that the more passengers, the more sustainable, etc., etc., etc.
Thanks, Douglas. Don't say anything. Oh, Ron, you want to come in?
Can I just clarify, is it option 1 and 2 that's been asked for? 4 buses, 8 buses? That'd be 4 down, 4 up.
Douglas?
Yeah, it's 4. At the moment, there's 4. 4 going up, 4 coming down. It's the same. But yes, from Dumfries anyway.
Thank you, Douglas.
Well, if there's no more people want to come in, what's your name?
Hello, it's Kieran Gillespie.
Okay.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I'm aware I maybe should have came in earlier when Danny was speaking regarding the bus services, the local bus services in Dumfries. I'm here because of the Lochside bus, the number 10 bus.
We're actually on item 10, which is a specific bus service, which is the 101, 102. We're
Right.
not here to talk about the Lockside service.
So did I come in here at the wrong time? Should I have came in earlier?
Well, it should have been when we had the bus update, items 6, 7.
Right, sorry. I didn't have a sheet of paper in front of me at that time.
I'll bring Douglas in to respond just now.
Chair, yeah, I'm happy to have a discussion with you after. It's actually a commercial bus service that's we have no involvement in. It's run by Stagecoach commercially, so the board has no oversight of it. But I'm quite happy to have a discussion with what the issues are, and perhaps if there's a requirement at the next board meeting, we can raise it with the board at that point.
Sorry, I was under the impression that I could come today and voice an opinion on the service from Stagecoach, my local bus, but it's really just about it's such an unreliable service, and the reason...
As Douglas has already said, we'll have that discussion after we're on item 10 on the agenda. Thank you anyway. Thank you. So if there's no other speakers coming in, Hugh?
Chair, I'm a community councillor for Lockside and Woodlands.
Hugh, we're not discussing the Lockside service.
I know.
We're on item
But
10.
the lady's got a point. Can somebody take it up with her, please?
We could do that after the meeting, Hugh.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so we'll now move to the recommendations. I'm quite happy to move that members of the board are asked to agree the contribution of £128,333 per year to SBT for local bus service 101, 102 to Dumfries to Edinburgh. Who's got their hand up? Karen.
I have only to say I really support the recommendation, Chair. I do think also, and I think Ian was highlighting, this is really good news. So if the board agrees, it'd be great to get some positive coverage of the decision that we've made. Thanks.
Thank you. So with that, I take it we're all in agreement for the contribution. I don't see anything otherwise. Thank you very much. So I have no further business, so thank you everyone for attending today's meeting. Have a safe journey back. Thank you.